Welcome to Stream Tips, episode number 2. In this video, we're going to cover easy ways to make and improve custom emoticons for Twitch. Let's get right into it. So you just got a fancy new subscribe button and you're looking for some ways to make nice emoticons to either reward or even entice new subscribers. Now, there are a lot of ways to go about making these emoticons, but I'd like to share a couple of tips that I've learned along the way to make them just a bit nicer. For this video, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you have beginner to intermediate knowledge with both Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator. If you don't and you're brand new with them, then I'd recommend checking out some other tutorials first to brush up on your skills with the programs. Likewise, if you're an expert, then I'd say maybe you know some of the tips that I'm going to share, but maybe you don't. Anyways, there are a few types of emoticons out there, and these would include things like icons and symbols, text-based emoticons where you accompany an icon with some text, or you just have the text stand alone, and then real-life icons, which would basically be like if you made a silly face and you resize it down into emoticon size, or something iconic from your stream. We're going to share tips for all three of these, but this won't be your general step-by-step tutorial video. I'm not going to share exactly how to make these. I just want to share tips with you how to make your current ones or future ones even better. Let's start with the basic icon or symbol emoticon. After I've decided the idea for the actual emoticon, I like to first sketch it out with pencil and paper. Then I like to bring the scan of a picture into Illustrator to create it in a vector format. Now, there are a few reasons why I don't start directly in Photoshop. The first is it's easier for me to create a crisp vector icon in Illustrator, and then editing it is a lot more simple. Further, it will help me with the resizing process because Twitch actually requires 3 different sizes for your emoticon submission. So after the emoticon is done in Illustrator, you can literally copy and paste the whole entire thing directly into Photoshop, or you can use the file place feature as well. Now, when I paste it in, I always make sure to select Smart Object, since this will ensure no quality loss when I'm resizing. Because I like to use the free transform tool sometimes to resize it exactly where I want, and then sometimes I blow it back up or I shrink it, and quality can be lost when doing this within Photoshop if it's not a smart object. Anyways, let's go ahead and start with the largest size that Twitch requires, which is 112 by 112 pixels. Typically, I always look at my emoticons on both light gray and dark gray backgrounds. Now, this is because I know that some users, such as myself, use Chrome add-ons or other add-ons like Better Twitch TV to make their Twitch appear a bit darker. So I try to make an emoticon that works for both color backgrounds. Also, when you look at something on a dark background, it can help you spot any flaws or some things that you might want to change. Now, for this emoticon, I wanted to make sure that the outside edges were a bit more defined. So I did add a stroke around the whole entire icon by using a layer style. From here, I like to zoom out to 100% view and then even zoom out to 50% view to see it when it be a little bit smaller, and I'll make any adjustments that I need. Then I'll resize it down to 56 by 56 pixels and then to the final size of 28 by 28 pixels. Now, I should first let you know that when you want to actually save these at the right size, what I like to do is use File, Save for Web and Devices, and then I go ahead and name the icon, and then I use an underscore 56 by 56 or 28 by 28, whatever size I'm actually doing, so that when I submit them, I actually know which one's which, and it's just a nice way to organize my files. Now, one thing that I do want to point out is that you need to be aware that some details might be lost when your emoticons get very small. So in your original drawing, it could be useful to exaggerate a little bit. And what I mean by that is in the case of this T-Rect emoticon that I made, the original eyes and teeth were actually a lot smaller than they are in this version. So when I was viewing the icon or emoticon at 112 by 112, it actually looked really good because you could still see the teeth and the eyes. But when I shrunk it down to the 28 by 28, it lost a lot of detail and you could barely even see the teeth. So I went back into my original Illustrator version and made both the teeth and eyes a lot bigger. Then I brought it back into Photoshop and did the resizing process. And then everything turned out to look really good even at its smallest form. So make sure to keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and move on to the text-based emoticon. Now, it might seem like the most simple, but there are some things to consider before producing these. Of course, the most obvious is going to be that our icons can only be so big. So we don't want to jam in too big of a word or too much into this in order to keep legibility at its highest. Now, Photoshop also might not be the best tool for this, but I do have some simple steps that you can take to make your text a lot more clear, especially at smaller sizes. Now, the first thing that we want to do is set our text anti-aliasing to sharp. You might not notice a huge difference in my video, but if I do zoom in a lot, you should be able to see the way the text renders is actually quite different from before. And when you view your text at 100% zoom, you should be able to tell a pretty big difference when your text is very small. Now, the next thing that I'd recommend is that you adjust the letter spacing or kerning. Now, you can do this very easily, and adding space between each letter will make a huge difference in legibility, I promise. And then lastly, because of users that use light or dark gray backgrounds, I typically put a high contrast color behind with a stroke or a shadow. And then this helps it really pop out. Now, this step isn't always needed, and it is something usually aesthetic. So try it out with yours and see how you like it, but it can make a pretty big difference. The last thing that I want to cover are the real life emoticons, something like a funny face that you made or a dog from your stream, something like that. So the first thing I'd recommend for this type of emoticon is make sure you get really good lighting and take a high quality picture if possible. Now, if you're taking a screen capture from a previously recorded stream, then something like this obviously won't be possible. But if this is the case, don't worry, we'll take care of it. Now, once you have the image that you want to use, you'll want to crop around the face or object for the emoticon, and more than likely, you'll want to fit as much of this object that you can as possible within the space given. So when you're cropping this, make sure to hold down Shift to ensure that you'll make a perfect square, and then adjust from there to get exactly what you want in the shot. Now, from here, you'll actually have a few options of how to go about removing the unwanted areas of this emoticon. You can use something like the magnetic lasso or the pen tool to select areas around the face. But typically, this option will actually give you jagged edges around your object. If this is desired, then this is probably the best option for you. But if you want a cleaner look, then what you could do is actually use something like the eraser tool to simply erase unwanted areas. However, my preferred method is by just using a layer mask. Since this gives you the most flexibility than the other methods, this is why I like to use that. Also, don't forget to switch between light and dark backgrounds every once in a while to make sure everything looks good on both. Plus, this will really help you find any really light artifacting that might not be wanted in your design. Once you have your emoticon done and everything's removed that you want, there's one tip that I'd like to share that I think a lot of people should start using, and that's enhancing the details of your emoticon. Now, what happens when you resize your image down is that Photoshop will basically guess what pixels you use based on what's in your image and what sort of sampling you selected. Now, the problem is that when you get very small, some of the details will get left out or even interpreted in a different looking color because there's only so much space in the image. So let's take a look at one of the emoticons that Dan's Gaming uses. You can see that his emoticon has enhanced the white in his eyes and even his teeth. If this wasn't done, then it'd be really hard to see his eyes and teeth when this image gets a lot smaller. So how do we go about achieving this for ours? What we're going to do is simply make a layer over our emoticon, and since we don't want any of the shadows or highlights bleeding over the edges of our emoticon since it's going to have a transparent background, what we need to do is make sure that we copy over the layer mask from the old layer. Now, we could have done this at the start with a group layer mask or something like that, but I just thought of it, so let's do it this way. Now, what we need to do is simply control click the old layer mask, and then once we have that selection, make sure we have the new layer selected, and then just hit add new layer mask, and it's going to copy it right over for us, and we don't have to worry about that bleeding at all. And make sure that when you're actually going to do the painting of the highlights and shadows that you have the layer selected and not the layer mask. Now we're going to use a white brush to enhance any potentially lost highlights, or a black brush to enhance any of the shadows, we're just going to paint over those areas and enhance them. Now, we can even play around with our brush's opacity to get the desired effect that we need in case we don't want a full white or a full black. This is very helpful on things like eyes, teeth, eyebrows, or even dimples in the face. So play around with it and try it out and get the desired effect that you want. Well, that about wraps up all the tips that I wanted to share for making emoticons on Twitch. If you make any emoticons with these tips, please upload them to something like Imager and share the link with me, or shoot me a tweet at nerdspone on Twitter. And if you have any questions about this video or recommendations for my next stream tips episode, please leave them in the comments below. The next video will be covering green screen-like effects that you can do in XSplit and OBS using their color or chroma key. So make sure to subscribe to check that out. And of course, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.